want to double click into that change on the fiscal impulse. A couple months ago, we got a bit of a head fake when the Big Beautiful Bill came out, and we got the CBO scoring, and they were talking about, it sounded like the fiscal deficit was going to go from 7% of GDP to 8% of GDP, but they didn't include any tariff revenues in that scoring, which it felt like caused a bit of a head fake for people. And then now you're starting to see some of the analysis where it's what's actually more likely that when you consider tariff revenue, we're going to go from, say, 7% of GDP deficit to, I don't know, 6, maybe even like 5.5 or something. Can you explain how markets would digest that? It feels like everybody's betting on this idea that as long as we have a large deficit, stocks go up, everything goes up, bonds are pretty shitty returns. But what does it look like? And maybe we can just pretend to be economists for a second and say ceteris paribus. If we just assume no change in monetary policy, but just that change in the fiscal deficit, like what does that do to the economy? And what does it do for how markets think about it?
Good question. I would say when you think about growth in an economy, there are really two ways to generate it. One is structural, so that's demographics and productivity, good old ways. Like the more the labor force grows, the more the economy grows. And the more productivity grows, the more the economy grows. And right now, Trump policies have actually reduced a bit of that structural growth in the US by a cut on demographics, right? Effectively, you have labor force growth pretty much close to zero right now. So it's only productivity doing the heavy lift in the US. And you might say, yes, AI is going to increase productivity. Fair enough. But on the margin, that structural growth in the United States is probably around 1.5% real right now. But there's a second lever to grow, which is cyclical growth. And you can generate this very simply by printing money. And there are two ways to do that. You can do it from a government perspective. So you can inject resources into the private sector by basically, cutting taxes or doing stimulus, right? You're basically increasing the net worth of the recipients, which are households and corporates. Or you can do it via private money creation, which is basically credit creation. So when everybody levers up and goes and buys stocks on margins, buys houses, does a debt-funded capex, which is actually what's going on right now in AI and data centers, you also are able to add a cyclical layer on GDP growth. So you got to watch the amount of money creation, but the important thing is the second derivative. And I know it sounds very mathematical, but it's not that complicated. So the world is built in a way that most economies do create money every year. So that means most governments are running a fiscal deficit around the world. And if they're not, you will find that the private sector is doing a lot of leveraging on the other side. So I spend a lot of my year in the Netherlands, in north of Europe, and here the government is all about primary surpluses. They never want to print a deficit. But what happens is that the private sector, on the other hand, goes ballistic on the housing market. So there is a lot of money creation happening via mortgages in the Netherlands. So wherever you look at the economies, Felix, you will see that either private or public or both, they're creating money over time. It's the fiat system build up effectively. But there will be the acceleration or deceleration of this money creation, which is very important. So for the trajectory of market and the trajectory of growth, you need to look at how fast you're creating money. Are you creating money on a faster pace than last year? Are you accelerating the creation of money or are you decelerating it? Now, if Trump only does tariffs, and these tariffs are borne by US consumers or corporates, and the OBBB is the only fiscal thing he will do, what will happen at that point is that the acceleration of money creation in the US will actually slow down. First plateau and then slow down, which means the US will still print deficits, but on an acceleration basis, it will look like a car who's still going at 100 kilometers an hour, but it's decelerating because last year it was at 120. Okay, that's the picture you should bear in mind. And the whole thesis of run it boiling hot sits on two assumptions. The first is the Federal Reserve, independence being completely dismantled, one. Second is that the car doesn't decelerate. So that the tariff 400 billion annualized gets more than offset by not only the OBBB, but some other fiscal stimulus on top of that, which will make the car re-accelerate again. And just to top it off, the private sector money creation in the United States is also going upwards. And this is not because of mortgages. I mean, the mortgage applications in the US are flatlining to going down, but it is because of debt-funded capex. So basically, effectively taking on leverage to build AI data centers and AI infrastructure. That is also money creation that shows up in earnings and shows up in nominal growth in the United States. So you have to picture always all these pieces of the puzzle: private money creation, public money creation, and the second derivative. In other words, is the car accelerating or decelerating? And that will normally give you a good picture of whether nominal growth is about to go up or go down in a specific